Hey,
Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome to another Breathe Pulse. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight's episode, we're going to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the project that stands as the longest Highline ever walked in United States history. My name is Dakota.
it's your boy, Young D Davis.
We're your hosts for tonight. We're slackliners. We're climbers. We organize Breathe. We love this sport, and we're stoked to bring you this awesome episode tonight. Every week, we're here live with teachers, artists, storytellers, slackliners, and even scientists. So if you haven't done so already, visit the website, discoverbreathe.com, subscribe, check us out on Facebook, tune in week after week for awesome content. This is a Breathe Pulse. So tonight,
Dakota,
yeah,
we've got some dope slackers in the house tonight.
let's bring them in.
All right, I'll bring them in.
Hey,
What's up,
guys?
What up?
Hello.
You made it.
All right, guys, thanks for being here. Let's just start off with a quick little introduction. Say your name, maybe where you're tuning in from tonight, and then, what your role was in the 1 kilometer project. Just real quick, just 10-second little pitch from each of you. Hit it.
And then maybe 2 seconds of if you were a fruit, which fruit would you be?
Whoa.
Clayton, start us off.
All right. My name is Clayton Underwood. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was primarily tasked with bolting the 1 kilometer, I guess I would say. I like to slackline. I think I would say I'm maybe like a blackberry of some kind, or maybe an apple. I'm not sure. It's hard to consider what kind of fruit I would be right now. But yeah, I like to slackline, and I'm super psyched to have gotten to be a part of the project with some of these cool humans right here. I'll pass it to Anna.
Hey, my name is Anna Lincoln. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I was just, I guess, one of the many riggers who was a part of the 1 kilometer project. And if I would just be some type of melon, like one of those melons that's green on the inside. I forget what they're called. They're really good though.
Like a honeydew.
Yes, a honeydew. That's me.
Okay. Good answer.
Nick?
Tuning in from Glenwood Springs, Colorado. My name's Nick Dean. I like to consider myself a rigger. Once it's rigged, I'll usually just take it easy till the end when we want derig. And I fancy myself as an expert derigger and rigger and problem solver overall. So shoots, let's do this, beautiful people.
You're not getting out of the fruit question, dude.
Oh man. What is that about squares and rectangles, right? So all fruits are vegetables, but not all vegetables are fruits, right? So I am some fresh Colorado kale in the veggie bowl. Yeah.
That's an answer I would expect out of Nick Dean.
Caleb, on to you, bud.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Caleb Beavers, and I guess my role for the 1K project would have been supplying half the webbing, the Y2K, and I helped rigging, obviously. I'm tuning in from Boulder, Colorado as well, and let's see, for a fruit, I'd probably have to go with an orange.
Solid.
A solid
Very
fruit.
decisive.
I had some time to think about it.
True, yeah.
Cool. So here's how tonight's going to work. People that are watching live, type your comments, your questions, engage with us. If we really like the comment or the question, we'll throw it up on the screen. We can talk about it. But we like engagement. We'll chat. tonight's plan is we're gonna talk about, your individual experiences walking the line, the rigging logistics, man, the planning, a little bit of everything. But before we get into all the nitty gritty behind the planning, what I really want to just kind of hear from you guys is, let's paint the picture for the audience here. I'm assuming that each one of you had the opportunity to hop on the line at least for a little bit. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So maybe you guys can paint that experience for us. I myself, I've been to the Fruit Bowl many times. I've slacklined in Moab many times. I love the area. But for people that maybe haven't had the opportunity to highline or slackline in Moab, and let alone on this gap, maybe you guys can put some poetic words to paint a nice picture in our head. Let's hear what this is all about. Why does somebody want to walk a 1K line? Convince us right now.
Don't do it.
Do it.
Do it.
It's really hard and it's not fun. Don't ever do it. Leave all of the 1Ks for us.
Hearing. I'm with Clayton.
Caleb, you should go first because you sent it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, Moab is like a really crazy place to highline. Obviously, the exposure there feels way different than anywhere else, just because of the sheer walls and I guess the color of it. It's all orange, but yeah. So I don't know. When I first went to Moab, I was like pretty petrified by the exposure, but eventually you kind of get over that, and so. Yeah, really on this 1K, I wasn't scared of the exposure that much or anything. I was just more nervous about the sheer monstrosity that was ahead of me. And I was like, oh man, how long am I going to be out on this high line? What happens when I get to 500 meters and I'm half a kilometer from the wall? But I ended up just standing up and I just kept stepping, and eventually I got to the other side and it felt really good. And
What was your time, Caleb?
I sent it in 50 minutes, which was, I was hoping for under an hour for a crossing, and it worked out.
Heck, you had time to take a couple whips if you wanted to.
Nah, there's not enough time for that.
So I'm curious, what was it quiet in the middle of that line? I mean, what were you hearing? What were you feeling? Is there a lot of space underneath your feet? What is it?
I was listening to music, so I can't say anything about the quietness. I'm sure it was quiet, though, because there was no wind and it was just dead calm in the canyon. But I was listening to some funk music, so definitely in my brain it wasn't quiet. It was cool. I got to walk towards, I guess what we call the far side, which is walked basically to the edge of this wall, and you get to see the rest of Mineral Bottom Canyon in the background. So that was pretty cool, seeing the expanse in front of me. But yeah, I just kept my eyes on the line really and just kept going.
Nice.
Strong
I feel
dude. Strong work, Caleb.
Yeah.
I feel like 50 minutes is a long time to do anything. Were you impatient at all? Was there any moments where you were okay, I'm ready to be off this thing, or were you just saturated in stoke?
Definitely I don't know, maybe the first 50 meters I was kind of a little shaky, and I was like, oh man, let's just get this over with. And then I eventually got into a flow and I kind of just didn't really think about it. In the last 150 meters, I was like, all right, you're there, keep going. I want to get off, but I don't want to rush because I'm doing it. And I just took my time really. And to be honest, it didn't feel longer than say the 400 meter that we did last year. My personal experience on it didn't feel that much longer. I think I've gotten a little accustomed to big lines, so I don't know. It kind of surprised me how fast it went by in my brain.
Nice. Anna, you got anything to add?
Yeah, so I think I actually walked the opposite way on the line than everybody else here. I walked from the far anchor back to the home anchor. And the way that the line is, the home anchor is a little deeper in the canyon. It's basically where the far anchor of the 430 is. And so rather than walking to that like really sheer cliff, you're walking into the bowl and the exposure is a little bit less what you're walking toward. And also the angle of the sun is a little bit different. So I actually couldn't see the whole line when I was walking. I actually got off and I looked back, and the way the sun was shining on it, you could see the whole line. And I was like, oh, that's a really big line. But while I was walking, I could only see like 300 meters or so in front of me at any given time. You know, it just looked like it just kept going, but it felt like a normal line. And because I was walking toward more of like this slopey side of it, it didn't feel as exposed, and it was just super chill. I was like, yeah, it's just a really long slack line, and it just keeps going. It was just super fun. So yeah.
Amazing. Nick Dean,
Anything else from
you made
either
a
of you
crossing.
guys?
You made a crossing, right?
I sure did. I got a couple notes to put in on Caleb and Anna. So I crossed after Clayton, which was wonderful to watch and was very helpful in my ability to make it happen for myself. But Caleb, it took me double your time. So it took me about an hour and 40 minutes to go from one side to the other. My music was in and out, so it would work for like meters, then it would stop randomly, and it would be just me in the air for 150 meters, and then I'd sit down and be like, all right, play next song. And then I go 150 meters, and then it would just turn off again randomly. So I got the experience of both sides. At the time of day, Anna, I walked it from home anchor to far anchor opposite of you, but the sun was at its best shining on the far end to where I could only see about 100 meters in front of me on the line itself. And I got up to about that 500 meter mark, and I'm like, okay, yeah, well, you're there in the middle, so keep on stepping. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, let's go. Look at that. You're much further than you were a minute ago. Go again. So it was great. And an hour and 40 minutes is a long time to do something and to keep concentration. And the hardest part, I think, about it was my mental capacity for that. My body was, pretty ready for it. I don't think I had any sweat stains on me when I got off. I don't think I really, sweated at all for the whole crossing, but I didn't bring any water. I ate granola out there in the middle of the line, and I didn't get hard, and it was a great experience. So yeah.
You had granola but no water? That sounds so awful, Nick.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I learned to breathe through the nose and not the mouth, and it just, it worked. I can't tell you why, but science probably,
I actually have a couple of things to add on the music thing. I actually wasn't listening to music at all on my walk. I was like, I'm just going to, experience the space, and it's going to be really beautiful. And I think I really quickly regretted that, because all of a sudden it was just my brain being like, there are so many people. Because I was like sixth in queue, in a queue of like 16 or something. And we were very uncertain if we would have enough time for everybody to get on. And so there was a lot of pressure to go as fast as I could so that everybody would get an opportunity. And so I fell super early on in the line. I fell like before the first connection, because I was like, had these Skinners on and they were too loose, and I took them off and I kept walking. But then the whole first 500 meters was just like me thinking like, am I walking fast enough? Should I just turn around? I'm taking too much time. This is a bad idea. And just being like, okay, if I just get halfway, it's just as much time to finish the line as it is to turn around. and just like convincing myself like, okay, just go halfway, just go halfway, just go halfway. And then literally, and this happens to me all the time on bigger lines, as soon as I get to the halfway point, it's so much more fun, because then all of a sudden you're in the home stretch and you're just like, yes, I'm doing it. Like there's no turning back now. Like everything is going great. I'm crushing so hard. I'm the best. This is great. But because I wasn't listening to music, I could also hear other people further in the bowl. We had the 200 meters rigged and the 70. And so I could hear people like bouncing, and I heard somebody send one of the 200s, I'm pretty sure, while I was walking. I was like, oh, that's really nice. And like just people hooting and hollering further into the bowl. So that was kind of fun. It was really enjoyable walking back to the home anchor and like knowing that I'm going back to the homies and to where all the stoke is.
That's dope.
Right on. No, that's great. So I'm curious, were any of you guys scared?
Very.
All right, so you guys are humans.
I don't know. Anna said no. She said she wasn't scared.
No, I was just like,
but I was nervous.
Yeah.
That's more appropriate. Nervous, not scared, but nervous. Yes.
Yeah, I just would like to add a couple things, just because it sort of ties into this, but also like my experience in the line. But I think something that's important to recognize, like all of the people who aren't here, who also got to cross the line, and something that is really cool for me right now, like upon reflecting, is just recognizing that more or less, like maybe one or two people got on the line who didn't cross, but other than that, like essentially everyone who sort of was putting in the time and effort to contribute to the project basically got to cross the line, which is incredible considering it was only rigged for 72 hours. But like, I would agree wholeheartedly that like when I was on the line, I never really felt particularly scared, at least not within the context of highlining in general, which like, you know, is always like the balance, the mental game. But yeah, I crossed in an hour with 4 or 5 falls, which was like way better than I anticipated. And my main goals in terms of crossing were to have fun, like cross the line, and like be ready to go when like I got an opportunity, if I did, because as Anna has touched on, like all of these people we queued basically randomly and like were assigned a position, and like that lines up maybe with like when you'd like to slackline or not. And Caleb, I think, can speak to this a little bit because he didn't ultimately take the first walk of the line or second, but like was based on sort of his ability to decide when he wanted to walk. So I ended up walking on the last day, but I was the first in queue. So I was like, I'm going at 8, but then Drew was psyched. So he took like the 7 a.m. slot, and I was like arriving at the anchor for my crossing, like 8:15 or so. And he's like getting close to the other side and just getting me stoked up as fuck. And, so then like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get on this beast. And like, I actually took music, which is interesting because I almost never have ever walked with music. It's something that I like have normally not found comfortable or like natural, I guess. I don't really know. But I was like, yeah, I've been practicing a little bit in the last month or two just to make sure I like knew if I wanted to take it, I like had my system, and I listened to music the whole way. But something that I would say that I agree with, like a lot of the other sentiment that's been expressed here, is that, you know, like you tie in and you want to like not feel like you're scared when you're in the middle, especially, right? You think like, man, it's far away from everything. And so the sort of like armor and like strength or whatever that you try to wear when you're on the line, where you're like, I'm focused, I'm going to keep moving, I'm not going to fuck around. I mean, I didn't send, so I can only imagine like the distinction sort of between those two feelings. But nonetheless, I almost walked it in the same time as Caleb, but with 4 falls. So it's really, that makes me think a lot about like your patience and willingness to like rest and take your time without falling, which is, you know, a huge goal. But anyway, sharing the line and everyone getting a crossing to me was like a huge part of this. I'm like so blown away that in the period of time that we had, that everybody was able to, you know, have an experience on that line, which was like whole, like very real and like a part of their effort put into the project as well. And like none of us are necessarily just like, you know, pro world record slackliners necessarily, but everyone was pumped. Like people really supported each other. We took every moment like available whatsoever to walk on that line. And you know, it's in the Fruit Bowl. It's like, for me personally, a place where tons of highlining history comes from, and I've gotten a lot from that space, going there and visiting and like learning, especially with the exposure, and just like it's a stunningly beautiful landscape. So to contribute back to that space, who many of the people whose shoulders we stand on as slackliners in this year, you know, have spent a lot of effort, time, money forging this path, and we can go contribute a 1 kilometer and like somewhat casually rig it and basically like cold crush it with a shitload of folks. Like to me, it was like pretty stunning. Like I was like, wow, we can really do anything, like as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah, shout out to Marshall for creating such a dream team, and I'd work with all you cats again for any big project. This was a wonderful experience to do it, and you guys are all very in it and on it, ain't it?
Right on.
Nick was great.
So for anybody that's just tuning in, watching live right now, this is a Breathe Pulse. Type your comments, your questions in. Might be able to get them answered from these folks here in the room with you. Cool. Yeah, guys, nicely said. Really, really inspiring. Nice work. Absolutely love it. So kind of want to jump into, you know, let's understand, you know, what it took in order to get this project put together. So like in my mind, you know, kind of what I see is that there was a huge effort that went into probably, you know, the planning and the logistics, like let's call it the pre-planning phase, you know, maybe weeks and you know, prior to the line never being rigged, of coordination, who's going to bring what, you know, what's the gap, you know, what's the team look like. I'm sure there's a pretty good process for that. So I want to hear about the pre-planning phase, and then the rigging phase is something completely separate. So let's start out with the planning, and maybe one of you guys can give us an idea on how you structured your team and how it all came together.
I was tagging.
Okay. I think the funny thing about the team and how it all kind of came together from my end is we went to the Durango Highline gathering that Marshall had organized. And basically they rigged a 580 there on green and spider silk. And there's just a ton of big line stoke there. And I think we all came out of it like, hey, like, let me know if you're going to the Colorado Bowl, or like, hey, I kind of want to rig a 1K, or like, we're looking at gaps for a 1K. We're looking at gaps for a 1K. And then Marshall just brought everybody together from the stoke of that gathering and some other people who weren't able to make it to that. And that basically became our crew. And that's part of the reason the crew is so large. Like it like a little ridiculously large, but also it was so great to have all these groups of people from across the US able to come together and rig this line together. So that's kind of where it all started. And then it just turned into a series of Zoom meetings. And I don't know if one of you guys want to take it from there. That was just my.
Yeah. So we had like basically a main group message going, and we had like a gear spreadsheet where we all put in what gear we were going to bring, and then we could see what we needed, if we needed anything. We had multiple Zoom meetings to, you know, talk about logistics and like specifically how we were going to rig the line. A lot of the planning was weather based, I would say. Like, I mean, with a line that big, in other experiences, they've gotten destroyed in the wind if it's gotten too big, or got destroyed by a rainstorm or whatever. So we were really cautious about having like a perfect weather window and not having like any kind of question where like, oh man, like it might be good for one day, but then Friday we might get our line destroyed. So a lot of the planning was like working with the weather and like everybody kind of like checking the weather and discussing that and, you know, potential options.
Are you guys like reading reading wind forecasts and stuff, or are you just like on Apple Weather? Like, how technical are you getting on these weather reports?
Oh, yeah, like wind forecasts pinpointed at that specific location. I think Marshall was talking to like the local airport, and getting like local meteorologists.
Some other of our participants had paraglider apps on their phones and things for pinpoint, and as well as handheld device. I couldn't tell you the name or whatnot, but there is a lot of wind data being gathered throughout the weeks prior as well of being there, just getting ready for it and prepping.
So I'm curious. I'm guessing you guys probably had like a date. You initially were thinking it would go down. Did it happen on that first date?
No, not even close. I was gonna look it up and try to see what the original date was, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But I think it was like
week in November, I think.
So yeah, I mean it was pushed. It got pushed twice essentially due to more or less 2 storms in the region. And actually, I would say for me that was like one of the big things that like created some of the like cumulative anxiety around like finally getting on the line, was like this feeling of like, oh my God, like we're gonna do this thing, and then the weather is like pushing it back, and then it's like up, and you're like, okay, cool, like we're gonna walk on the line now, and you're like, maybe is it gonna happen? And then yeah, so the weather was completely a challenge, and for Caleb and Haley, whose webbing was up, it makes complete and total sense to be super cautious and prudent around that, like both financial investment and like thing that can be used a lot of times, and the safety of people going on the line, which like sort of get assessed differently. But in terms of the pre-planning, it was like, wow, yeah, we definitely don't want to like try to put up a 1 kilometer when there's going to be wind in the forecast.
So I'm curious, you've got this message thread, right? I mean, how many people are speaking their opinions on this thread? How big of a group are we talking?
20, 25?
20.
Oh my God.
Just about 20.
Yeah, and there was sort of a more core group.
17 people or so on the line. So our core group was about 17 people, and we have a couple more people helping out here and there, and 20 connections on the line. Every 50 meters, right? Is that 20 connections? Is that right? Is math working for me?
19 connections.
I mean, I would say there was like a dozen people who were really active for a lot of the discussion around, hey, like we're pushing the date, like what's our rescue plan if we can possibly come up with one, like what's our rigging plan. Like there was a little bit more of a vocal group, Marshall sort of being the leader of some of that, but ultimately a lot of people really contributed, that's for sure.
It looks like we're getting some comments on the message board from Kyle and Mr. Michael Matterjack himself. Maybe Davis or Dakota, you'd like to address that?
Yeah,
bring him on in.
We can segue into like let's get into the nitty gritty of like how much tension, what kind of rig are we looking at here? So Kyle asked, how was the tagging? Was it easy?
So this is a really funny question because Kyle was one of the mans down in the canyon, the gritty of the tag, and there's him and Kevin in the tag.
Is this a light stab at all of you guys?
To answer this question.
Without him down there, we would not have a 1K. He was with Kevin and Kyle were the two that made this rig possible.
Absolutely.
End game.
In terms of like some of the pre-planning, there was like a lot of discussion around, should we tag the line sort of traditionally and try to just pull the rig across? Should we try to like maybe drop 2 sides of the rig down into the canyon to a team to connect that there and then pull it up from there? Should we, all these different things were coming up, right? But then we also intended and ultimately did rig a sight line, like a visibility line that was made of 4 mil and 5 mil accessory cord with wind socks essentially every like 50 meters, let's say. probably was not quite that, but nonetheless. So like there were certain ideas around it, to be honest with you, it got a little bit disorganized. I mean, that's just what it was. Like, it's all good, worked out. But as things are like happening, the sightline gets rigged basically, and we're still trying to tag the rest of the line. And it's like I was bolting, so I'm not like fully present in the tagging like scene, but I'm also like overhearing via the radio or whatever else, like, well, the tagline's stuck or something like that. And as soon as me personally, like, big line rigger, like, here's like, oh, the tagline's stuck, I just am like, well, cool, like, that is the end of the day to me. But Kyle and Kevin fucking sacrificed themselves and just ran all around Mineral Bottom Canyon. I mean, who knows what went on down there? I don't know, but they did manage to get the line tagged. Like, the sight line got up quite easily, and some of the shenanigans that we tried, I think, around Anna was honestly a part of that more than I was, and even Caleb was sort of more focused on that because I was like pounding holes into the rock with a drill. So I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, so for the rig originally, we had been planning on like rigging down to a center anchor, just like sending the webbing down and connecting it and then lifting it up. But then we realized with the clearance on the home side, that was maybe not the best idea for the webbing because it could get tangled. So the night before, we switched our rigging plan to just a traditional, like, pull the line across. And then we were like, okay, well, how should we tag it? And there was a lot of discussion on how we should tag it. And then I don't think there was any true consensus on how we should tag it. And so
there was true consensus.
Okay, what was the consensus?
So, Anna, we started by taking the tag from.
Were we doing the consensus thing? Was that was the consensus thing?
So from
okay.
static side of the existing lines in the veggie bowl, the fresh Colorado vegetable, the static end of that, we would hike it all the way around to the first fin, and then the drone would have had met us there at that point. But as we found out, the drone was infeasible as a tag, and that fin was not as structurally sound for us to be able to lift off and connect to tags from. So
Max, join the call. They're just
It sounds like we struck a little bit of a chord here with the consensus.
Well, Max is just upset because Max and I, so like Nick and I hand tagged the 430, and then we're like, okay, we're gonna drone tag from the south anchor of the 430 to the south anchor of the 1K. And I get there and it's me and Max, and I have the tag and Max has the drone, and we don't have a walkie-talkie and we can't communicate with everybody. And it turns out the south anchor of the 430 is also like 900 meters from the south anchor of the 1K. So like that's not good. That's a really big gap. That's not gonna happen. And so me and Max just have the drone and all the tag, and we're like, okay, like what are we gonna do? Like maybe we'll go over here and we'll get a little closer, and then maybe we'll be able to drone tag it. And then we like I like stayed at one anchor and he like moved forward a bit. So the tag was like in a V, and then it was like I release tension and they pull on it, and then it just swings over to where they are and everything will be fine. Everything was not fine because we couldn't communicate with the other anchor to also pull tension, and that canyon is actually really low. So when I let go, the tag just swung down and got caught on a boulder. And that's when Clayton probably heard, oh, the tag line is stuck on a rock. And then at that point I was like, oh, this line is not going up. Like it's over and there's nothing we can do. But then we ended up just hucking a tagline down from the far side. And then, Kevin and Caillou went and they hiked up to where the tag was stuck, and they hiked all around and they got it all connected. And then we finally really, like, somebody else asked, like, if you rig the same gap again, would you rig it any differently? Like, just throw the tag, throw it to the bottom of the canyon. It worked perfectly for the sight line. And it would also work perfectly for the 1K.
I'll give that quick shout out to Shane Mulligan of Slack Life New Mexico, who had ideas and opinions around the tagline, and he rigged the sight line, and it was just hanging there, and we were all like looking at that like, wait, why is that there, and we're not using it to tag our 1 kilometer line? Like, this is very confusing. So
it was too thin though. It's too thin, the sight line, to tag the webbing.
Yes, that's true. But nonetheless,
either way, thank you, Caillou and Kevin, for making this possible.
For sure.
You guys down tromping through the bottom of the canyon.
And they both sent
Experience. None of us. All
right,
20.
so we've got the tagline across the gap. What was it? What millimeter rope?
6
What were we
mil,
looking at?
right?
Yeah.
6 mil?
It was mostly 6 mils, like 600 meters of 6 mil, and then some other smaller stuff for the first 400.
Was it continuous 600-meter piece?
I
Oh
wish.
no.
There was one continuous, shout out Ben Donnelly, had like a continuous 300 meter piece that we got to use for the very end. And that was really nice.
Okay.
Max,
It didn't break.
So let's so we've got the tagline up. It's a 6 millimeter rope. You know, what was the hauling process like? Was it pretty difficult? Haul the webbing across?
No,
You just pull on it.
we had
They
it
had
in traction. We had like
Yeah, there you go, Caleb.
a bunch of people yanking on it. I want to say like 7 people just with the cinders just going at it, and we just kept going until we got the webbing.
What about the other side,
I would
feeding
actually
out the
say-
webbing? What was your
I
guys'
think actually
approach?
figuring it out was probably the
Home side.
we had like a Z. We had like the bolts of the 430 were sort of off into the side of our new anchor, and then we used like some of our anchor and like basically create a big Z drag with a kootenai and
Thank you,
this was probably like
Dakota.
a hangover. Yeah. Thanks for the kootenai. So that part was actually a little bit odd, just because connections are coming and like different people's webbing and different bags and like Haley and Caleb definitely had their shit together and their like rigs were tight and right. And then we had also some of Ben Donnelly's webbing available if it ended up being like more than a kilometer, but we just needed to like sometimes basically tell the far side like slow the fuck down, like it's burning us. It's hot, like please chill. But like we just honestly like we just keep letting it out and it didn't ever get so heavy as you would sort of like. I mean, I don't know about anyone else in this chat or whatever who's listening, but you see like the crazy contraptions they've rigged up for like the 2 kilometer rig, where they're letting out the webbing with these like, I mean, I was like just unsure and we just basically just rigged it kind of like I've rigged every other line and it was chill. And so I was like, okay, well, this is a little bit unexpected, but nonetheless, like and then it was like a matter of tensioning. I don't really want to jump ahead here or like take away another prompt opportunity for Dave's or Dakota.
We
But
did have
nonetheless, like,
an interesting scenario. So
We
basically,
needed
when I was on like the static side, so I was pulling the tag. When we got the webbing, we could see that like 150 meters of it, it's in 50-meter sections. So 3 of the sections were just like twisted to hell, like more twist than I've ever seen. Like so twisted that all the backup was sucked up. So obviously we had to like deal with that before we could walk it. So somebody brought over like a pulley system and a swivel, and we had to do some maneuvering and get it off and untwist it, and it was kind of something to deal with. It was really crazy.
put a swivel in
Interesting.
Yeah.
on the tag.
The lesson to that story is when you tag, just put a swivel on it and you won't have a problem.
And
Put
just
a
make sure like
swivel where?
something in between
Swivel
the tag
goes
and the
static
sewn loops
side.
of the static side, yeah.
Yeah, like
And like the other thing that could be helpful is like if the tagline has something to help pull it down so that like there's not just a continuous sort of tension between the line and then the tag. Like if there's something to maintain that downward force, and if it's on a swivel, then that's even better, but something to keep it from just wanting to like, if there's any twists or like sort of coiling in the rope, as you're tensioning it and pulling it, it's like introducing a lot more tension in that system. It'll just like unwind and it can twist the fucking line to hell, especially Y2K being incredibly light over this like huge span. Like there's enough tension, standing tension in the tag as you're pulling in that like that wants to unravel. That's at least my understanding of it.
Sweet. Yeah. Good lessons learned there. So, all right. So we're finishing up the pre-planning phase here, and we've started to jump into the rigging a little bit. But before we completely transition into the rest of the rig, I guess who thought of the fruit bowl? Why Moab? Clayton, you touched on an excellent point. Like the fruit bowl has so much history, and it's a nostalgic place for slacklining. Is that kind of the thought from the very beginning, or what was the process there?
Yeah, I mean, Marshall, who's unfortunately unable to be here due to connectivity issues, like, would really be the one to ask. I actually, like, basically tried to sort of get myself into this situation so that I could walk a 1 kilometer, and, like, was not by any means a part of the, like, I don't know, OG, like, I mean, I went to the 580 in Durango and was, like, very stoked, and but I don't know. I mean, there's potential for it. The 880 from last year was there. There's certainly no reason why you couldn't rig one there. And like the anchors had been essentially scouted by Marshall. He was proposing the thing. I got involved in the chat. My understanding was, hey, let's make sure. So something I would actually like to mention just regarding the bolts, and that's pretty much it, is, Jerry and Slackline US and GGBY invested an enormous amount of money into bolting the Veggie Bowl or Colorado Bowl. I don't necessarily prefer the Colorado Bowl. I'm not going to get too salty about it. But, like Jerry, Slackline US, GGBY, like that, like sort of situation was able to like buy a lot of bolts and just wholesale bolt the Veggie Bowl, Colorado Bowl, like in one period of time. Like Jerry didn't rig any of the lines, just went through and boom, like wholesale bolted the place. Did a really standard bolting pattern for GGBY's hang frame rigs, which is like 4 bolts in the anchor and then a 1 bolt for directional. So that was an enormous gift to those of us who like to walk long highlines, because as the Colorado crew can attest to, they just fucking showed up and like threw them all up and like sent everything and then bounced out of there or whatever. But like we then, yeah, I mean, I'm psyched for you guys. That's fine. But the like point being that, that energy and effort, I think, needed to be replicated if we were going to like contribute steel to that zone. Like it's not the fruit bowl where Terry bolted things how he did. People have retro bolted whatever, and there's like tons of lines there, and it's all good. Like it's a recognized area for highlining, and like there's a lot of fucking bolts between the space nets and everything else, right? But like the Veggie Bowl has a standard, and so I sort of in the group conversation in the beginning stages like really advocated, along with Caleb and a number of other folks. Essentially most everyone was like, we should also do glue ends. So I was like, I'm happy to like order the bolts and kind of manage that part of it. And so ultimately, it also does feel really nice to, at the end of this project, recognize that, hey, like we are now at, I think, I'd have to double check, but it's like 34 highlines between the fruit bowl and the veggie bowl that are available to be rigged. And that's like, from my personal standpoint, like coming in and doing a 1 kilometer and then adding another trick line parallel to the 70 that was there, like it's nice to be able to contribute something to the place that has given a lot. I mean, not to mention the 1 kilometer, which is like the for sure most meaningful thing that's ever happened to me at the fruit bowl almost. But to bolt it correctly was important. And like we invested as a community, like we split up the cost of buying all those bolts, and like I mean, who knows, in like 2 years, we'll see like what happens with the pandemic and everything. But I mean, it's totally not unreasonable to imagine a GGBY that encompasses both sectors of highlining and could include the 1K that we bolted, which would be absurd. I mean, like good weather window, many other people could hop on that line and recognize that it's super, or two, or Nick is giving me the
parallel. Let's go.
Yeah. It is pretty crazy.
I got a little bit on a tangent there. Sorry about that, but
no, don't say sorry. You're spewing good info for sure. It's crazy that like you could go to the fruit bowl and walk a 20-foot high line, and then like walk 20 minutes and walk like a freaking kilometer. I mean, yeah, it's a mecca at this point. It's awesome. Something that's sticking out to me is that like at the end of the day, like it was just a slack line, and like there's you can draw all these like similarities between a United States record and just like your everyday average high line. And so like a couple things that stuck out was like there's a heartbreak zone, but instead of like 20 feet for me when I'm walking like my project, it's like 150 meters, and like you want to drape down a little section as you're pulling the tag across. And so like it just feels really good to hear from you guys that like your like everyday average highliner has the capability of rigging something like this if they like put in the time and energy into like really dialing in these skills.
And just to
And
get on the
so
line.
exactly, yeah, and like like you walk it with music, you walk it without, you're like your skinners are too loose. Like there's just like all the same like issues and qualms. Um, is there anything that stuck out to you guys where you're like, whoa, I've never like had to deal with this before? Or like any kind of like weird things that stuck out as like just rarities because of the line being so long or because there was 20 freaking people involved in a project or
The
anything like
the
that?
thing I just want to say that I think is interesting is the line is 50-meter segments, and like many folks in the Highline community, especially in the last year, have started either interacting with segmented systems more, or are like thinking about them at least in some capacity, like maybe considering chopping their webbing or whatever. But like the Y2K, first of all, so smooth. So smooth. Like the connections, no stress. Like you don't have to like really, like the way I connect my webbing, you really need to monitor where you step at the connection, or else it could roll and you could whip like immediately, like just be tossed. The Y2K, it's like you can definitely walk over the connection and it feels chill. But something that Anna and I like, I think really experienced differently is like I was like trying to count the connections, and I was like pretty blown away. I stood up and didn't fall for like way longer than I anticipated. I didn't fall for like almost 300 meters or something, I think. And I'm like trying to count connections, and I have just like within 5 or 6. I was like, I have no idea. I don't know. Is that 5 or is it 5 or is it 6 or whatever? I kept going. At the end, like I don't look at the anchor. I don't know how like what other people's style of walking here is, but I for sure am not like, especially Anna described earlier, the line can be like very visible in one light or one direction of walking, and in the other it can be like really hard to see. But like if it's a very visible line and I look and I'm like watching the whole thing, it's intimidating. So like I typically take like a comfortable gaze, like in stance with my position for my neck and head, and like I'll sometimes like check in. And I was at the end ish of the line thinking like, oh, there's probably like 150 meters to go. I'm like counting connections, like just like, oh, there's another one. And then you like go by 1, go by 2, and you like look and check in again. And you're like, oh no, I don't know. It's like maybe 150 meters now, and then like another connection, another connection. You're like, where the fuck is the end of this line? Like, am I just walking into nothing? Like, where is the end? And it was just for me personally, that was a little bit new because I didn't. At a certain point, I really recognized like I'm making enough progress. I feel solid. I'm not scared. I'm not stuck. I'm just gonna keep going, and the line feels like butter. So you're cruising, but at the same time, you're also like, yeah, like it's 1K. I'm trying to get there, kinda, and you're like counting connections, and you're like, how many connections are there? It's just like it's bizarre. Like it like loses context in this canyon to try to be like, I understand where I am and like how far I have to go. Like for me personally, like it was pretty surreal, and then suddenly I'm sort of like there at the end of the anchor. But just an anecdote, because like Anna was like, I was able to count every single connection up to like a certain point, and like I didn't even make it past like 5 or something.
Well, I'm pretty fortunate that I have a lot of practice walking Y2K because both Caleb and Haley own Y2K, and they rig big lines in the Front Range and they let us walk on them. And also like I fell at 350 meters and it was like my second fall. I was like, I should be able to walk way better than this. And so I was like, okay, like my PR is 400 meters. Like I should be able to walk at least 400 meters again without falling. And so that's part of the reason I was counting the connections so closely, is because I was like trying to hold myself accountable to that goal. And then I lost track. I made it that 400 meters, and then I lost track after that. I was like, I'm probably pretty close to the end at this point. And at the end of the thing is, at the end of connected lines, you always think you're at the last connection. You're pretty close to the end, and you like see a connection. You're like, that's got to be the last one. I'm totally there. It never, ever, ever, ever is. The first time you think it's the last connection, you're at least 2 connections out, maybe 3 connections out. And that's just something you have to be mentally prepared for.
So, sounds like Anna, you weren't quite as lost in the sauce as Clayton was. You had a pretty good perception of like where you were at in the line.
Yeah, for sure. Like I knew when I hit 500 meters. I knew when I hit 700 meters. Go ahead, Nick.
So this is my first time walking on Y2K ever. Pretty neat stuff. Cool webbing. Connections are great. It's the first time I've walked anything over 580 meters a month before, and crossed the Colorado state record in Durango Highline gathering in roughly the same amount of time it took me to cross the Kilometer a couple months later on Y2K. And I gotta say, what was different for me on this line was not the exposure, not the middle of it, but I got to a point where I was looking down the line and I got vertigo again. Like my first time on a Highline, anybody can recollect getting out there in the place of the fruit bowl and being like, whoa, you're way higher than this line is long. And now it's different, but the vertigo comes back in a different way because of your ability to either focus on a invisible line or a cliff edge that just doesn't seem like it's getting any closer. And the amount of bounce that's happening, you have a sight line, an aerial sight line next to you that's static and not moving, and you can use that as reference, and you can see you're moving, but you can't really feel it because it's so long. And vertigo came back to me, and that was a good beginner's feeling, kind of like a smoker's addiction, you know, getting that itch.
Yeah. Sure. Right. Caleb, anything stand out for you? Anything out of the ordinary for you?
No, like every line that I've rigged on Y2K, I try and count the connections and I lose track. It's just when you're in the flow state, you're like, all right, 1, 2. Was that 3 or was that 2? 3. And it just keeps on going. I think I counted to 11 on this kilometer, and then I was like, I have no idea if that was actually 11. That could have been 10 or 12. And so I just stopped, and I just, you're walking, just keep going. And eventually the far wall started to look a little closer. And then once I started like recognizing that, I was like, okay, I must be getting close. And then I could visually look and see how many sections I had to go. And I was like, all right, let's go.
Something I just want to add about that portion of the line, because me and Caleb walked the same way, as well as Nick, but just not, I don't know, but the like sub bowl, that like pinnacle tower thing that's out there, like I also really had a strong like feeling like once I kind of was past or near that thing, that I was like, oh, I'm like for sure past halfway, because I definitely again did not count. I don't know if I felt lost in the sauce necessarily, but whatever.
It sounds like you were a little lost in the sauce, man. It's nothing to be ashamed
like
of.
Having the time of my life, I was like, are you shitting me? This is a highway. I'm just sprinting, like just hauling ass. It was crazy. But I mean, that was something that Kevin and I talked about a little bit too, briefly, who also sent, was like, we had similar times, but I fell like 4 or 5 times and he didn't fall. So it's interesting, like the pacing, which comes for different people. I mean, Mia inspires me so much because she'll walk. I mean, the nylon world record right now, 680 meters in Canada. She walked it for like almost 2 hours without falling. It didn't sit. Or I think she didn't.
So crazy.
I mean, it's like incredible endurance, So, because I think I fell my first fall, and I knew Caleb Kayo had sent at this point. I was like, when I fell, I had started sweating, so I like took off a layer and like. But I remember thinking like, oh, that's a like proud send to like not fall for the whole way. Like when I got to the far end, and I know I was there when Anna got off, and Anna was just like stacked, and also was like, oh, that's sad. It's over. Like I could keep going, and I was like, wow, that's fucking rad. But I was like, I got close to the end of my walk, and I thought, absolutely. I was like, hell fucking yeah. I was like, if it kept going, I would just and if we had the time, turning around and actually giving it a send burn. Because like for me, I didn't have that objective at all. And I'm not stressed about that. Like I didn't go into it being like, I need to send. Or I didn't even really want to. But like I think after walking it and it feeling just, at least from my perspective, like pretty incredible. And like Caleb had described to someone when I was around, that like it got really steep, And so I was a little bit gripped about how steep it was going to be. And then like something that was interesting about it is it never really felt that steep, but like at the same time, like you would take a step and like when you weighted it and like shifted forward, it felt like you fucking like elevated like so high. Like it was like the last probably 100-ish meters, like every step I took, I felt like I was climbing. I mean, the sandstone wall that you're walking towards is like so clean and like exposed and beautiful, like sandstone. And you're just approaching it in this like absurd position, right? You're just like floating like a drone in front of the cliff. And like every step you take, you just like are literally climbing like almost like probably, maybe, I don't know how far, but like you really just feel like you're just stepping out of the canyon all of a sudden at the very end. And you're like, this is nuts. Like no fucking way. Like,
all right. I got a question for you guys. And no flexing and no bullshit here. This is time for the truth. Are you guys describing this line as walking so easy because you're like really good slackliners? If that's the case, like great, tell me it. Or is it just because these longer lines are like in the micro, like each step easy to walk?
And I think it's the webbing. Like when you have like this lightweight, low stretch webbing at really long lengths, it's just easy to walk. And I don't think that's something you can understand until you experience it. And you're like, oh yeah, like no movements come back at you at all. You just got to stay on the line.
But at the same time, Caleb, like it's interesting because people described after their crossing different like experiences of sort of like the crux for them. And I wouldn't say like that sort of account from my perception was the same for everyone. Like some people described one side or the other as being like the harder part. And I still can't totally account for that. What I can speak to is that like is at least from my perspective, 100 to 200 meter slack lines can be fucking hard, like really hard, like to the point where you're like, Jesus fucking, especially if they're not rigged correctly. Pardon my French, but like if things are like a little wonky or someone's like, mess up the line pretty heavily and it's candy cane, like it can be rowdy on a 150 meter line. It can be like the hardest slack line you've ever walked. And then as soon as you break a certain point with a certain webbing and a certain tension, something just mellows out a little bit. I mean, coming from a background of having been slacklining for a long time, like, yeah, I'm not trying to say I'm not a good slackliner, but I don't think like I was tying into the line thinking like, oh yeah, like I'm so nasty and sick, I'm just gonna fucking crush this shit. Like no way. Like I was like, okay, like I'll just do the same procedure as always, like put on harness, tie into leash, buddy check, okay, scoot out, now sit start, keep going. Oh, I'm not falling, I don't know why. But like I think with longer lines, there's this like softness to them where like you fall and like there's this enormous cushion and like the movement of the line is slower and like you learn to slow your body down and like the thing feels like cruiser. But I mean the 1K didn't, as Nick sort of alluded to, like the 580 in Durango was hard. Like that was a hard slackline. It essentially took me last time as well as Nick and Les Falls to cross the 1K on Y2K as the 580. So it's like it's all about the webbing. So again, shout out to Haley and Caleb for having Y2K. Glad we didn't like drop it across the floor of the canyon and destroy it.
Me too.
Yeah.
So but the Y2K lives on for another rig.
Yeah, but I mean, like we at the same time, like that same place, same weekend, there was 240 or whatever meters of green, Feather Pro backup, rigged in the Veggie Bowl, Colorado Bowl, whatever. And people, like a lot of people reported that they just like thought that was the most fun, pleasant slackline they'd ever been on. And I got on it. That's my PR. And I had a super sick time. I was like, this thing is so chill. Like, so I don't know. I think it's all about just knowing what you have to work with, like rigging it correctly. Like if it had been a Frankenline and like a bunch of different high techs, like all put together with wacky extenders and like there wasn't enough backup in one section, which like sort of was the case at one point even. I mean, that's the thing is all these Highlines, they're not even static within when you rig them. Like the 1K, if it had someone like totally whipping the shit out of it at one point, it could have really changed the dynamics of the whole line, I would argue still, but less so than a 500 meter line. So like, I don't know, it's really crazy.
Well said. Well, all right. You got one more thing?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, the Y2K lines do feel really good, but, like, you do still have to be strong You know, like there is definitely a certain amount of experience that we all are bringing to it that maybe we do kind of take for granted. I definitely
Thank you
came off
for
of
saying
it.
that.
Yeah, I came off of it thinking, you know what, like if I had trained more, like this would be more fun because there is a certain amount of strength that you do have to have. But ultimately, it is just a really big slackline, and if you just like slacklining, like it feels like a slackline. It's pretty normal.
And just not to like launch into another spiel, but like something that really I think is important to recognize about a line of a kilometer in length, or probably even above 400 meters, depending on the place. You know, like we night before rig, we're sort of trying to like hammer down a little bit more in terms of the rescue scenarios, and like something that I think really should be understood, and I think is understood by everyone who crossed it. And that's like sort of what I'm sort of alluding to, like what Anna was saying is like, we have the confidence or comfort to go out on the line. It's like we had good conditions, like the line was rigged safely, and when you went on, it wasn't like you were like, ooh, maybe it's going to get windy in the next like 30 minutes. Although toward the very end of the rig, there was maybe a little bit of that potential. But like, if you go on such a line, it's a risk that you're taking, and like that's really important to understand, because like being out there 500 meters from each side and like getting stuck is a very challenging situation potentially for everyone involved. And so like I think that was something that was really important that was discussed around the fire like the night before we rigged, was there's like we can plan as many like ways that we could try to rescue people off of this thing as we could try to think of, but like any scenario where someone needs rescuing is going to be really difficult. Like, so the first priority is take responsibility for yourself when you go on the line. Like we'll all do the best we can, but there's not really like an ideal rescue plan for 1 kilometer, at least that I'm like comfortable with, you know what I mean?
Parallel 1 kilometer.
Well said. So it's really interesting because, I think we all need to give you the recognition, the individuals on this call and the entire team that made it happen, as well as all the other slackliners in the world that have been pushing this limit. It takes an athlete to cross these lines. So, we're going to give you that for sure. The endurance, physically and mentally, it's incredible. So hats off to each and every one of you that was able to contribute towards this project. And I think it's also a realization for me and probably a lot of the other viewers out there that, it's good to push our limits, right? And if you've got some skills and you're getting the hang of slacklining, you can have a pretty quick progression, and surround yourself by good mentors and really learn it and be inspired and kind of encompass that motivation. You can do some amazing things. So it's great to see where you guys have taken the sport. Continue to push it. My last question, maybe just one of you can answer, is what's next? Are you
A mile.
anybody interested in walking the world record or the mile? All right.
180 feet. 1 mile.
Yeah, the mile, more 1Ks, longer than 1Ks, just more big lines. Like, why not? Might as well.
So I'm curious. Now that you guys have walked a kilometer-long Highline, there has got to be so many gaps out there that are just absolutely incredibly aesthetic, right? Even when the 300-meter Highline was sent by Jerry back in the day, I remember a comment from Scott Balcom. He said, "All right, I know all you guys are going to be trying to chase the length for a while, but think about the type of lines that you can rig now." So maybe I'll leave that with you now. So now you can walk a 1 kilometer long Highline. Holy cow. The world is yours. And I'm really stoked to see what you guys can do with it. Make it your canvas, and really looking forward to seeing what happens. So with that, we've been on here for about an hour. Really want to give a big thanks to you guys for spending the time with us tonight. It's been great. Any last little words from any of you?
Never stop slacklining.
It takes a community.
No retirement. Yeah, no retiring allowed.
when you think you've got nothing left, you've still got 50% more.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Ben Donald.
Arm pain is an illusion.
When in doubt, buy high tech.
Nylon world record.
Come to Breathe next year.
Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you guys so much. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Stick around for a second. Don't go anywhere after we go live. I want to say thank you to you guys.
Yeah.
Dakota, any last words for the folks at home?
Gobble,
Check
gobble.
out our website. Give us a follow. We bring awesome content to you every single week. We love the Slackline. We're all about it. Also, Breathe is coming out with our own Slackline webbing and Slackline kit, so tune in. Coming to the market soon, my friends.
That's that unreleased leaked info.
If any of you made it this long, cool.
All right. Bye, everybody. Breathe heart.
Yeah.
Later.